Picture this: a fleet of ships, their sails billowing in the wind, setting out on a journey into the unknown. The year is 1493 BCEE, and these brave explorers are about to embark on one of the most ambitious expeditions of the ancient world.
Ooh, I'm getting goosebumps already. Are we talking pirates? Treasure? Maybe a kraken or two?
Not quite, Marcus. But I promise you, the real story is just as exciting. Welcome, time travelers, to another journey through the ancient world with Echoes of Antiquity. I'm your host, Dr. Lydia Thornton.
And I'm Marcus Reeves, your friendly neighborhood history enthusiast and co-pilot on this adventure through time.
Today, we're setting sail on an epic voyage that will take us back over 3,500 years to one of the most ambitious expeditions of the ancient world.
That's right. Folks, we're talking about Queen Hatshepsut's famous trade mission to the mysterious land of Punt in 1493 BCE. It's a tale of daring exploration, diplomatic intrigue, and some seriously exotic souvenirs.
Indeed, Marcus. This expedition wasn't just a simple trading mission. It was a bold statement of power, a logistical marvel, and a pivotal moment in ancient Egyptian history.
And let's not forget, it was all masterminded by one of Egypt's most fascinating rulers, a woman who dared to call herself Pharaoh. Talk about girl power.
Exactly. So strap in, listeners. We're about to embark on a journey of myrrh, gold, and glory, decoding Hatshepsut's Punt expedition. Here's what you can expect. We'll explore the political climate of ancient Egypt, the challenges of seafaring in the 15th century BCE, the mysteries of the land of Punt, and the lasting impact of this remarkable voyage.
And don't forget the baboons, Lydia. We can't forget the baboons.
No, Marcus, we certainly won't forget the baboons. So, are you ready to set sail?
Aye, aye, Captain. Let's do this. Ooh, I can almost feel the sea spray on my face, Lydia.
Well, hold on to that feeling, Marcus, because we're going to start our journey right at the docks of ancient Egypt. Imagine, if you will, a bustling port on the Nile Delta. The year is 1493 BCE, and excitement is in the air.
I'm picturing a scene straight out of The Prince of Egypt, minus the singing and plus a lot more sweaty, muscular guys hauling cargo.
Well, you're not far off, Marcus. The port would have been a hive of activity. Ships of various sizes lined the quays, their wooden hulls creaking in the gentle waves. Workers scurried back and forth, loading supplies and securing rigging.
And I bet it was noisy too, right?
Absolutely. The air would have been filled with a cacophony of sounds, sailors shouting orders, merchants haggling over prices, the rhythmic chants of workers as they loaded heavy cargoes onto the ships.
Wow, that really brings it to life. And let's not forget the smells. I'm guessing a mix of salt air, exotic spices, and, let's say, the pungent aroma of hard-working sailors.
Yes, the olfactory experience would have been quite potent. But amidst all this usual port activity, there was something special happening. 5 large ships were being prepared for a journey unlike any other in recent memory.
Ah, Hatshepsut's expedition fleet. You know, Lydia, I've been wondering, how did Hatshepsut's ships compare to other pharaohs' fleets? Was she going all out with this expedition?
That's an excellent question, Marcus. Hatshepsut's fleet for the Punt expedition was indeed impressive, even by pharaonic standards. Most Egyptian boats were designed for river travel on the Nile, but these ships were built for a sea voyage.
So they were like the ancient Egyptian equivalent of upgrading from a rowboat to a yacht.
In a sense, yes. These ships were larger and more robust than typical Nile boats. They had to be, to withstand the rough conditions of the Red Sea. But what really set this expedition apart was its scale and ambition.
How so?
Well, consider this. The last recorded expedition to Punt was nearly 500 years earlier, during the 11th dynasty. For centuries, direct trade with Punt had been lost. Hatshepsut wasn't just organizing a trade mission. She was reviving a lost connection and pushing the boundaries of Egyptian seafaring.
Wow, so she was basically the Christopher Columbus of ancient Egypt. Minus the whole colonization thing, I hope.
That's not a bad analogy. Although, as you noted, there are significant differences. Hatshepsut's expedition was primarily about trade and diplomacy, not conquest. But like Columbus, she was venturing into what was, for Egyptians of her time, largely unknown territory.
Got it. So, big ships, lost lands, and a queen with something to prove. Sounds like the makings of an epic adventure. But before we set sail, can you give us a bit more context? What was going on in Egypt that made Hatshepsut decide to launch this massive expedition?
Absolutely, Marcus. Let's take a step back and set the stage. We need to understand who Hatshepsut was and why this expedition was so significant.
Good call. I mean, it's not every day you hear about a female pharaoh in ancient Egypt, right?
Indeed, it wasn't. Hatshepsut's rise to power was quite extraordinary. She began her royal career as a queen, the principal wife of Thutmose II.
So, she married into the job.
In a manner of speaking, yes. But here's where it gets interesting. When Thutmose II died, his son by a secondary wife, Thutmose III, was still a young child too young to rule.
Ah, so Hatshepsut stepped in as a regent.
Precisely. She was initially the regent for young Thutmose III. But within a few years, Hatshepsut had taken an unprecedented step. She had herself crowned as pharaoh.
Wait, what? How did she pull that off in a patriarchal society like ancient Egypt?
It was indeed a bold move. Marcus, Hatshepsut legitimized her position in several ways. She emphasized her divine right to rule as the daughter of the god Amun. She also stressed her royal lineage as the daughter of the previous pharaoh, Thutmose.
So she played the divine right card and the daddy's girl card at the same time. Clever.
That's one way to put it. But it wasn't just about claims and lineage. Hatshepsut also proved herself to be a capable ruler. She initiated building projects, maintained peace, and most relevant to our story today, she revived trade.
Sounds like she was a pretty impressive leader. How did she compare to other pharaohs of her time?
That's an interesting point of comparison. Marcus, Hatshepsut ruled during the 18th dynasty, which was part of the New Kingdom, a period of great pharaohs like Thutmose III, her stepson, and later Amenhotep III and Ramesses II.
Oh, I've heard of Ramesses II. Wasn't he the one with all the giant statues?
Yes, Ramesses II was famous for his monumental building projects. But interestingly, Hatshepsut was also a prolific builder. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri is considered one of the architectural wonders of ancient Egypt.
So she could hold her own against the boys' club of famous pharaohs.
Absolutely. In fact, in many ways, Hatshepsut set the stage for the imperial expansion that characterized the later New Kingdom period. Her Punt expedition, which we're focusing on today, was a bold move that demonstrated Egypt's reach and power.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this expedition was such a big deal. It wasn't just about getting some nice souvenirs. It was about showing the world, or at least the ancient Near East, that Egypt was a force to be reckoned with.
Exactly, Marcus. And it was about more than just flexing Egypt's muscles. Trade was crucial to Egypt's economy and prestige. Luxury goods like incense, gold, and exotic animals weren't just status symbols, they played important roles in religious ceremonies and royal displays of power.
So, by organizing this big trade mission, Hatshepsut was boosting the economy, impressing the gods, and showing off her pharaoh credentials all at once.
That's a good summary, yes. But there's another important aspect to consider. By reopening trade with Punt, Hatshepsut was connecting Egypt to a wider world. This wasn't just about acquiring goods. It was about knowledge, cultural exchange, and expanding horizons.
Wow, when you put it that way, it almost sounds like an ancient Egyptian space program. Boldly going where no pharaoh had gone in 500 years.
That's an interesting analogy, Marcus. While they weren't leaving Earth, they were certainly venturing into the unknown. Now, shall we join those brave explorers as they prepare to set sail?
Absolutely. I can't wait to see what challenges they'll face on this epic voyage. Lead on, Dr. Thornton.
All right. Let's return to those 5 ships we saw earlier, now fully loaded and ready to depart. The excitement in the air is palpable as the crews make their final preparations.
I can almost feel the anticipation. But Lydia, I've been wondering, how did they actually get from the Nile to the Red Sea? It's not like they're connected, right?
Another excellent question, Marcus. There are actually 2 main theories about how they made this crucial part of the journey.
Ooh, I love a good historical mystery. What are the theories?
The first is that they used a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea. We know such canals existed at various points in ancient Egyptian history.
A canal? That sounds pretty advanced for ancient times.
The Egyptians were skilled engineers, Marcus. But you're right, maintaining such a canal was a significant undertaking. Which brings us to the second theory.
Don't keep me in suspense, Lydia.
The alternative idea is that the ships were partially dismantled and transported overland to Red Sea ports.
Wait, what? They took the ships apart and carried them across the desert.
It's not as crazy as it sounds. We have evidence of Egyptians doing exactly this for other expeditions. There were established routes from the Nile to Red Sea ports like Myrrh.
Okay, that's officially the coolest thing I've heard this week. Imagine seeing a fleet of ships being carried across the desert.
It would have been quite a sight. But whether by canal or overland route, the fleet eventually reached the Red Sea. And that's where the real challenges began.
Because sailing on the open sea was a whole different ballgame from river travel, right?
Exactly. The Egyptians were master riverboat builders, but ocean-going vessels were a different matter entirely. The ships had to withstand much rougher conditions.
So what kind of dangers were we talking about? Sea monsters? Krakens?
Nothing quite so mythical, Marcus. But the dangers were very real. Storms could wreck ships or blow them off course. There was always the risk of running aground on unseen reefs or sandbanks.
And I'm guessing ancient ships didn't come equipped with lifeboats and flare guns.
No, they didn't. The crew had to rely on their skill, experience, and a hefty dose of luck. There was also the threat of piracy to contend with.
Pirates? In ancient times?
Oh yes. Piracy is one of the world's oldest professions. A richly laden trading fleet would have been a tempting target.
Wow. So these sailors were really risking their lives on this trip. Which makes me wonder, Lydia, if you were a sailor on this expedition, what would be your biggest fear?
That's a thought-provoking question, Marcus. I think my biggest fear would be the unknown. These sailors were venturing into waters that no Egyptian had sailed for centuries. They didn't have accurate maps or charts. Every day would bring new uncertainties.
That's deep, Lydia. I was going to say something like running out of beer or scurvy, but your answer is much better.
Well, I'm sure those were concerns too. But let's think about navigation for a moment. How do you think these ancient mariners found their way across the open sea?
Well, they didn't have GPS or compasses. Oh, the stars, right? I've heard ancient sailors used the stars to navigate.
Exactly right, Marcus. Celestial navigation was crucial for ancient seafarers. They would have used the positions of stars, particularly the North Star, to determine their latitude and general direction.
But what about during the day, or on cloudy nights?
Good point. During the day, they would have relied on the position of the sun. They also used other cues like the direction of winds and currents, the color of the water, the presence of certain birds, and even the smell of the air.
The smell of the air, really?
Yes, experienced sailors can often smell land before they see it. Different coasts have different scents based on their vegetation and geology.
That's amazing. It's like they were using all their senses to navigate. But even with all that, it must have been incredibly risky.
It certainly was. And that's what makes this expedition so impressive. They were reviving navigation techniques that hadn't been used for centuries, at least not for such a long voyage.
No pressure or anything. Laughs. So, Lydia, how long do you think this voyage would have taken?
That's hard to say with certainty, Marcus. We don't have exact records of the journey's duration. However, based on later accounts of similar voyages, we can estimate that it might have taken anywhere from 2 to 3 months to reach Punt.
2 to 3 months at sea. In those ancient ships. That's a long time to be playing I Spy with nothing but water around you.
Indeed. The psychological challenges of such a voyage would have been significant. Maintaining crew morale over such a long journey would have been crucial.
I bet. So what do you think they did to pass the time? Ancient Egyptian board games? Swapping stories about the glory days of the Old Kingdom?
Those are good guesses. We know the Egyptians had board games like Senet, which might have been played on the journey. Storytelling was also an important part of Egyptian culture, so that's likely too. But much of their time would have been taken up with the constant work of managing the ship.
Right. I guess ancient ships don't just sail themselves. So what kind of jobs would the crew have had?
There would have been a variety of roles. You'd have rowers, of course, for when the winds were unfavorable. There would be lookouts watching for potential dangers or signs of land. Some crew members would be responsible for maintaining and repairing the ship, while others would manage the supplies and rations.
Sounds like a lot of teamwork was needed to keep everything running smoothly.
Absolutely. The success of the expedition depended on every member of the crew doing their part. It was a massive undertaking that required careful planning and execution.
You know, Lydia, the more we talk about this, the more impressed I am by the whole thing. Hatshepsut wasn't just sending out a trade mission. She was basically launching an ancient space program.
That's an interesting comparison, Marcus. While they weren't leaving Earth, they were certainly venturing into the unknown, pushing the boundaries of their known world. It required immense courage, skill, and vision, much like our modern space programs.
Exactly. So, after all this buildup, I'm dying to know what happened when they finally reached Punt. Was there a welcoming committee? A red carpet? Or just more sand and trees?
Well, why don't we follow our intrepid explorers as they finally make landfall and find out?
Lead on, Doctor. I can't wait to see what they find.
After weeks at sea, imagine the excitement as the coast of Punt finally appears on the horizon. The sailors would have been eager to feel solid ground beneath their feet again.
I bet. So where exactly are we? Somalia? Ethiopia?
The eternal question of Punt's location. We'll dive deeper into that mystery later. But for now, let's focus on what the Egyptians saw and experienced.
Okay, so paint me a picture. What did Punt look like to these travel-weary Egyptians?
Based on the reliefs at Hatshepsut's temple in Deir el-Bahri, Punt was a land of plenty. They depict a landscape dotted with palm trees and exotic plants. The Puntites lived in stilt houses raised above the ground.
Stilt houses? That sounds pretty cool, but also like a lot of work. Why not just build on the ground?
Good question. It could have been to protect against flooding, or perhaps to avoid dangerous animals. Remember, this was a land that had giraffes, leopards, and baboons roaming freely.
Oh, right. The exotic animal shopping list. I almost forgot about that. So what happened when the Egyptians first arrived? Was there a welcoming committee?
According to the Egyptian accounts, they were greeted by the ruler of Punt, King Parahu, and his wife, Queen Ati.
Ooh, royal reception? Fancy. What were they like?
Well, the Egyptian depictions of them are quite interesting. King Parahu is shown as tall and thin, with a pointed beard. But it's Queen Ati who really captures attention in the reliefs.
Why's that? Was she especially beautiful?
Well, the Egyptian artists depicted her as, let's say, generously proportioned. She's shown as extremely obese, with rolls of fat and thick limbs.
Wow, not exactly the ancient Egyptian beauty standard, I'm guessing.
No, it was quite different from how Egyptians typically depicted beautiful women. But it's important to remember that standards of beauty vary greatly between cultures. In Punt, Queen Ati's size might have been seen as a sign of wealth and status.
Fair point. So, what happened next? Did they roll out the red carpet for our intrepid Egyptian traders?
In a manner of speaking, yes. The reliefs show a peaceful meeting, with the Puntites welcoming the Egyptians. But then came the real purpose of the expedition trade negotiations.
Time to get down to business. So how did ancient trade negotiations work? Was it like an episode of Pawn Stars?
Not quite that dramatic, but there would have been some similarities. Both sides would have been trying to get the best deal possible.
So what did the Egyptians have to offer?
We know they brought items like bread, beer, meat, and fruit basic provisions that might have been valuable in Punt. But they also brought luxury items, finely worked jewelry, weapons, and tools.
Sounds like a good mix of practical stuff and fancy trinkets. What were they hoping to get in return?
The big ticket item was incense, particularly frankincense and myrrh. These were incredibly valuable in Egypt, used in religious rituals and as perfumes.
So that's where the myrrh in our episode title comes from. But wasn't myrrh one of the gifts brought to baby Jesus? It must have been valuable for a long time.
Indeed it was, Marcus. Myrrh remained a precious commodity for thousands of years. But the Egyptians weren't just after processed incense. They wanted to bring back live myrrh trees.
Live trees? That sounds challenging. How do you transport a tree on an ancient ship?
Very carefully. But before we get into the logistics of tree transportation, let's take a closer look at these precious plants in our Artifact of the Week segment.
All right, history fans, it's time to dust off our magnifying glasses and take a close look at this week's artifact, the mighty myrrh tree.
Myrrh trees, or Chamaephora myrrha, to give them their scientific name, are small, thorny trees native to regions of Africa and Arabia.
Not the most impressive-looking plants, I'm guessing?
They might not win any beauty contests, but what these trees lack in looks, they make up for in value. The real treasure is in their sap.
Their sap, like maple syrup.
Not quite as tasty, I'm afraid. When the bark is cut, the tree exudes a resin that hardens into reddish-brown lumps. This is myrrh.
And people wanted this because
Myrrh had a wide range of uses in the ancient world. In Egypt, it was a crucial ingredient in the sacred kifi incense used in religious rituals. It was burned in temples to honor the gods.
so it smelled nice?
It has a complex aroma, sort of sweet, but also bitter and slightly medicinal. But its uses went beyond just smelling good. Myrrh was also used in perfumes and cosmetics.
Ancient Egyptian perfume. Now that's something I'd like to smell.
You might have mixed feelings about that, Marcus. Ancient perfumes were quite strong by our standards, but myrrh's uses didn't stop at perfume. It was also valued for its medicinal properties.
Like ancient cough syrup.
Among other things, yes. It was used as an antiseptic and anti-inflammatory. It was even used in the mummification process.
Mummification? Okay. Now myrrh is sounding less like a nice perfume and more like something from a horror movie.
It does sound a bit macabre. But for the Egyptians, preserving the body for the afterlife was incredibly important. Myrrh played a crucial role in that process.
So this sticky tree sap was like a Swiss Army knife of the ancient world air freshener, medicine, and embalming fluid all in one.
That's not a bad analogy. And that's why Hatshepsut wasn't content with just bringing back harvested myrrh. She wanted the trees themselves.
Right, the famous transplanted trees. How many did they bring back again?
According to the records, they brought back 31 live myrrh trees.
And this was a big deal because
It was unprecedented, Marcus. This is the earliest recorded successful transplantation of foreign trees. They had to figure out how to keep these trees alive on a long sea voyage and then successfully replant them in Egypt.
that does sound impressive. So what happened to the trees? Did they survive?
The reliefs at Deir el-Bahri show the trees being planted in Egyptian soil, so at least some of them made it. They were planted in Hatshepsut's mortuary temple complex.
A bunch of scraggly, gnarled trees in a grand temple complex. That must have looked interesting.
Perhaps not the most aesthetically pleasing, but remember, these trees were incredibly valuable. Having living myrrh trees in Egypt was a huge achievement and a symbol of Hatshepsut's power.
I guess it's like having a money tree, but for real. But Lydia, I'm curious, how did they actually manage to keep these trees alive during the voyage? It's not like they had a botanist on board, right?
That's a fascinating question, Marcus. While we don't have detailed records of their methods, we can make some educated guesses based on what we know about ancient Egyptian agricultural practices.
Let me guess it involved some kind of divine intervention. A blessing from the tree god or something.
While I'm sure religious rituals played a part, the Egyptians were also skilled agriculturalists. They likely used a combination of practical techniques.
Like what?
Well, first, they would have had to carefully uproot the trees, preserving as much of the root system as possible. They might have wrapped the roots in damp cloth or moss to keep them moist.
Sounds like a lot of work. And I bet those trees weren't exactly travel-sized.
You're right. It would have been a major undertaking. They probably also brought soil from Punt to help the trees acclimate. During the voyage, they would have had to regularly water the trees and protect them from salt spray.
Wow, so they basically had a floating greenhouse on board. Talk about high-maintenance cargo.
Indeed. It's a testament to the importance of these trees that they devoted so much effort to transporting them. But it wasn't just about the myrrh. Bringing back live trees was a powerful symbol of Egypt's ability to transplant the riches of foreign lands to their own soil.
Sort of like saying, look, we're so powerful, we can make Punt's treasures grow in Egypt.
Exactly. Marcus, it was a display of both agricultural skill and imperial power. Now, imagine the excitement when those trees finally took root in Egyptian soil.
I bet it was like winning the ancient Egyptian lottery. So, Lydia, if you could bring back any plant from the ancient world to study, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Perhaps the silphium plant. It was a species used in ancient Roman cooking and medicine that went extinct in classical times. We're not even sure exactly what it was.
A mysterious extinct plant. That does sound cool. I think I'd go for whatever they used to make ancient Egyptian beer. You know, for science.
Of course, purely academic interest. Now, shall we get back to our expedition and see what else they brought back from Punt?
Absolutely. I can't wait to see what other treasures they found.
So, Marcus, we've loaded our ships with myrrh trees. What else do you think the Egyptians brought back from Punt?
Well, based on what we've discussed, I'm guessing lots of incense, some gold maybe. Oh, and didn't you mention exotic animals earlier?
Excellent memory. Yes, the cargo holds of Hatshepsut's ships were bursting with a variety of precious goods when they returned to Egypt.
It must have been like ancient Christmas morning when they started unloading everything.
I suppose it was. Let's go through the inventory, shall we? First, as you mentioned, there was plenty of frankincense and myrrh, both in raw form and as small trees or seedlings.
Check and check for the incense. What about the gold?
Indeed, they brought back a significant amount of gold. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahri show piles of gold rings being measured out.
Gold rings? Were the Puntites into jewelry making?
These weren't decorative rings, Marcus. In many ancient societies, including parts of Africa, gold and other metals were formed into standardized shapes for easier trading. These rings were essentially a form of currency.
Ah, got it. Ancient gold bars, basically. What else?
They also brought back ebony, a dark, dense wood that was highly prized in Egypt for fine woodworking and furniture.
Fancy. I bet that made for some nice pharaoh chairs.
Undoubtedly. There was also ivory, probably from elephant tusks.
Oh, that's less nice from a modern perspective.
You're right. Our views on ivory have changed dramatically. But in ancient times, it was a valuable material used for everything from decorative items to game pieces.
Okay, so we've got incense, gold, fancy wood, and ivory. Quite the shopping haul. Anything else?
Quite a bit, actually. They brought back animal skins, probably from leopards or cheetahs.
For fancy royal rugs.
Possibly, or for clothing. Egyptian royalty and high priests often wore leopard skins as a symbol of their status.
Swanky. So what about the live animals? Please tell me they brought back a giraffe.
The reliefs do indeed show giraffes, along with leopards and baboons. However, it's not entirely clear if all of these were brought back live or if some are just depictions of the animals they saw in Punt.
Oh, man. I was picturing a giraffe on a boat. That would have been a sight to see.
It certainly would have been. But even without giraffes, the baboons alone would have been quite a spectacle. They were associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom, so they were particularly prized.
Wisdom, really? Has this person ever seen a baboon?
Well, the ancient Egyptians saw profound meaning in many aspects of nature. But let's move on to perhaps the most important cargo of all the political and economic impact of this expedition.
Ah, yes. Because this wasn't just a really expensive shopping trip, was it?
Far from it. This expedition had far-reaching consequences for Egypt and for Hatshepsut personally.
I'm guessing it was good for the old royal reputation.
Extremely. Successfully reopening trade with Punt was a major achievement. It demonstrated Egypt's power and reach, and it brought an influx of luxury goods into the country.
So Hatshepsut basically stimulated the economy and showed off Egypt's naval prowess in one go.
Exactly. And don't forget, she was in a unique position as a female pharaoh. This kind of grand achievement helped solidify her authority.
Right. Because nothing says, "Don't mess with me," like a fleet of ships full of gold and baboons.
Well, when you put it that way. But you're not wrong. This expedition was a powerful piece of political propaganda for Hatshepsut.
Is that why she had it carved all over her temple?
Precisely. The detailed reliefs at Deir el-Bahri weren't just decorative. They were a permanent record of Hatshepsut's great achievement.
A bit like posting your vacation photos on Instagram, but it lasts for thousands of years.
That's one way to look at it. Speaking of those reliefs, why don't we take a closer look at them? They're our primary source of information about this expedition.
Sounds great. Time to put on our archaeologist hats and do some decoding.
Welcome to Deir el-Bahri, the site of Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. This is where we find the detailed reliefs depicting the Punt expedition.
Wow, this place must have been impressive in its heyday.
It still is, Marcus. The temple is considered one of the great architectural achievements of ancient Egypt. But for our purposes, we're most interested in the reliefs on the walls.
Right, the ancient Egyptian comic book of Hatshepsut's Big Adventure. What can we learn from these carvings?
A great deal, actually. These reliefs are our primary source of information about the expedition. They show us everything from the types of ships used to the appearance of the Puntite rulers.
Ah, yes, the famously full-figured Queen Ati. So how accurate do we think these depictions are?
That's an excellent question, Marcus. It gets to the heart of how we interpret ancient art. On one hand, the Egyptians were capable of very realistic depictions when they wanted to be. On the other hand, art always serves a purpose beyond mere representation.
So you're saying we can't take everything at face value.
Exactly. We have to consider why these reliefs were created. They weren't just a record of events, but a piece of political propaganda for Hatshepsut.
So maybe they exaggerated a bit. Made the myrrh trees a little bigger, the gold piles a little shinier.
It's certainly possible. But even with potential exaggerations, these reliefs provide invaluable information. For example, they give us details about ancient Egyptian shipbuilding techniques.
Oh yeah? What can we learn about their ships?
The reliefs show ships with a single square sail and multiple oars. They have a distinctive curve to their hull and a high stern and bow. These details help naval historians understand the capabilities of Egyptian sea-going vessels.
That's pretty cool. What else can we see in these reliefs?
They show us the variety of goods brought back from Punt, which we discussed earlier, but they also depict the Puntite villages, giving us a glimpse of what life might have been like there.
Right, the stilt houses. Do we see any other details of Puntite life?
Yes, the reliefs show the local flora and fauna, including the incense trees, palms, and various animals. They even depict a Puntite village with cattle grazing nearby.
It's like an ancient travel brochure. Visit scenic Punt, land of incense and stilt houses.
That's not a bad analogy. These reliefs were indeed meant to showcase the exotic nature of Punt, but they also emphasize the diplomatic nature of the expedition.
How so?
The reliefs show the meeting between the Egyptian envoys and the Puntite rulers as a peaceful, even friendly exchange. This portrays Hatshepsut as a skilled diplomat as well as a powerful ruler.
Clever. So she's not just bringing home the myrrh bacon, she's making friends while doing it.
Exactly. Now, it's important to note that while these reliefs are incredibly detailed, they're not a photograph. They're an artistic representation, created to tell a specific story.
The story of Hatshepsut's awesomeness, I'm guessing?
In essence, yes. These reliefs were meant to immortalize Hatshepsut's achievement and legitimize her rule. They're as much a political statement as they are a historical record.
So how do modern historians and archaeologists use these reliefs? Do they just take them at face value?
Not at all. We use them as one piece of a larger puzzle. We compare the information in the reliefs with other archaeological evidence, with texts from the period, and with what we know about Egyptian art and propaganda.
Sounds complicated. So if you could ask the artist who made these reliefs one question, what would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think I'd ask them about the level of artistic license they were given. How much of what they carved came from eyewitness accounts, and how much was embellished or imagined?
Good question. I think I'd ask them if they ever got tired of carving all those myrrh trees. Seems like it would get repetitive after a while.
Well, I suppose even ancient artists might have gotten a bit of sculptor's cramp now and then, but their work has lasted for over 3,000 years, so I'd say it was worth the effort.
True that. So we've decoded the reliefs, unpacked the cargo, and even imagined the smell of ancient perfume. But there's still one big question we haven't answered, right?
You're referring to the location of Punt, aren't you?
Bingo. I mean, we keep talking about this amazing place, but we don't actually know where it is, do we?
You're right, Marcus. The exact location of Punt remains one of the great mysteries of ancient history. But that doesn't mean we don't have any clues. Shall we dive into this mystery?
Are you kidding? I've been waiting for this all episode. Let's do it.
All right, fellow history detectives, it's time to tackle one of ancient history's greatest geographical puzzles. Where in the world was Punt?
I feel like we need a big map and some red string to connect all our clues.
Well, we might not have a physical map, but we do have plenty of clues to work with. Let's start with what we know from Egyptian sources.
Okay, hit me with the facts, Doc.
Well, the Egyptians described Punt as a land of plenty, rich in valuable resources like incense trees, gold, and exotic animals.
So, somewhere with a climate that supports those myrrh trees, I'm guessing.
Exactly. The presence of myrrh and frankincense trees narrows our search to parts of East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula.
That's still a pretty big area, though, right?
It is, but we can narrow it down further. The Egyptians reached Punt by sailing down the Red Sea, so it must have been somewhere along the Red Sea coast or not too far inland.
Okay, so we're looking at countries like Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, maybe Somalia.
Those are the main contenders, yes. Some scholars have also suggested parts of Yemen or even Mozambique, but those are less widely accepted theories.
So how do we narrow it down from there? Do we just start digging in all those places and hope we find a welcome to Punt sign?
If only it were that simple. Archaeological evidence is certainly part of the puzzle. For example, we found ancient Egyptian artifacts in Eritrea that could suggest trade connections.
Oh, cool. Like what?
Things like pottery shards and beads that match styles from Hatshepsut's era. But it's not conclusive proof these items could have arrived through indirect trade.
Okay, so archaeology is giving us some hints, but no smoking gun. What other clues do we have?
We can also look at the flora and fauna depicted in the Punt reliefs and compare them to what we know about different regions.
Ah, like a game of ancient animal guess who.
Something like that. For instance, the reliefs show animals like giraffes, leopards, and certain types of monkeys. This suggests a location in Africa rather than Arabia.
Score 1 for Team Africa. Any other clues?
Linguistic evidence has also been used. Some researchers have tried to connect the name Punt to modern place names or ancient language roots.
Let me guess it's not as simple as finding a town called Punt City.
I'm afraid not. But some have suggested a connection to the Somali word bunny, meaning fragrant woods. Others have linked it to ancient Ethiopian languages.
This is starting to sound like we're no closer to an answer. Do we have a best guess?
The current scholarly consensus tends to favor either Somalia or Eritrea, with parts of Ethiopia as a possibility. But it's important to remember that ancient Punt might not correspond neatly to modern national borders.
Right, because those didn't exist back then. So Punt could have been spread across multiple modern countries.
Exactly. It's even possible that Punt referred to a general region rather than a specific kingdom or state.
Wow. So after all this, we still don't have a definitive answer. That's kind of frustrating, actually.
It can be, yes. But that's often the nature of ancient history, Marcus. We work with the evidence we have, form hypotheses, and keep searching for new clues.
I guess that's what keeps it exciting, huh? There's always a new discovery waiting to be made.
Precisely. And who knows? Perhaps one day we'll uncover evidence that definitively locates Punt. Until then, it remains one of history's tantalizing mysteries.
Well, I for one am going to keep my eyes peeled for any stray myrrh trees next time I'm on vacation in East Africa. You never know.
That's the spirit, Marcus. And on that note, I think it's time we wrapped up our own expedition into the mystery of Punt and Hatshepsut's famous trade mission.
Already, but I have so many more questions. Like, did any of those transplanted myrrh trees survive? Did they ever make the trip to Punt again? And most importantly, what happened to all those baboons?
All excellent questions, Marcus. And they highlight an important point about studying ancient history. Every answer tends to lead to more questions. But I'm afraid we'll have to save those for another episode.
Oh, man. Can we at least do a quick recap for our listeners? You know, in case they dozed off somewhere between the stilt houses and the baboons?
Of course. Let's sum up what we've learned about Hatshepsut's expedition to Punt.
Hit it, Ak.
In 1493 BCE, Queen Hatshepsut, Egypt's female pharaoh, sent a trade expedition to the mysterious land of Punt. This was a major undertaking, involving 5 ships and over 1,000 men.
Don't forget the flat-pack myrrh trees.
Indeed. They brought back 31 live myrrh trees, along with gold, ebony, ivory, exotic animals, and, of course, incense. This successful mission reestablished trade with Punt after a gap of nearly 500 years.
And it was a big win for Hatshepsut's reputation too, right?
Absolutely. The expedition was a major political and economic triumph for Hatshepsut. She had it memorialized in detailed reliefs at her mortuary temple in Deir el-Bahri, which remain our primary source of information about the voyage.
But we still don't know exactly where Punt was, do we?
That's right. While we can narrow it down to the general region of the Red Sea coast of Africa, possibly in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea, the exact location of Punt remains a mystery.
A mystery that will keep archaeologists employed for years to come, I bet.
Indeed it will, Marcus. And that brings us to the end of our journey into ancient Egypt's most famous trade expedition. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of myrrh, gold, and glory, decoding Hatshepsut's Punt expedition.
And remember, folks, if you're ever in ancient Egypt and someone offers you a pet baboon, just say no. Trust me on this one.
On that sage advice, we'll say goodbye for now. Join us next time on Echoes of Antiquity, where we'll be diving into another fascinating chapter of ancient history.
And don't forget to leave us a review, preferably carved in stone and buried in the desert for future archaeologists to find.
Goodbye, and thanks for listening.